Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program today, we're going to be talking about something that sounds very intriguing, but once you wrap your mind around it, you realize that there might be an inherent truth that we need to pay attention to. That is of something known as energy that we have throughout the spaces within ourselves as well as the spaces that we inhabit. We'd like to reclaim our vitality and joy by being able to open up to infinite new possibilities in life. And our guest today teaches us that every time we have a thought or feeling, it doesn't just evaporate into nothing. Instead, what happens is that you make little deposits of that energy into the environment that you live in or the occupying space that you may be in. And over a period of time, these deposits can gradually build up like an invisible house dust to form a thick layer within the space. Like a cloud of whatever you've been feeling every time you pass there. We'll discover how we can personally cleanse and do space clearing as well by activating the power of our compassionate heart. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest and author of the book Clear Home, Clear Heart. Learn to clear the energy of people and places. Our guest joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today, Jean Hanner. Jean, thank you for being on the program with us today.
Hey there, Daniel. Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Now, tell us how you got started with this work here. What was going on where you must have had these very unique experiences to realize, this is a way that we need to maybe pay attention a little bit better about what's going on here?
Yeah. Well, at first it all sounds kind of strange, but really what we're talking about is being an empath or being a sensitive person, and I kind of fall into the extreme end of that range, but everybody is somewhere on that spectrum, and what I mean by that is that we're all far more influenced than we realize by the energy of the people around us who we live and work with, by the energy of the places that we live and work in. And for me, kind of being at the extreme end of the range meant that even as a child, I could physically feel the energy of people. That if someone was stressed or in pain, I would literally feel that in my own body as well. But I was kind of like the canary in the coal mine, that if I would walk into a room where someone was stressed and start feeling unwell, that didn't just mean that I was being affected. It meant that everybody was being affected. It's just that I was more aware because it was more intense for me. So as a child, I thought something was terribly wrong with me, that I could walk into an empty room and suddenly feel unwell because there had been an argument there 2 hours ago. Thought they were, I must be crazy. There's something, obviously nobody else is noticing this information, and even around people. But what I came to understand in my 20s was that there actually is kind of some invisible energy around us. I married into a Chinese family, very traditional family from China, and my mother-in-law was the one who introduced me to feng shui, which is now, of course, very well known and popular, but back then it wasn't known at all. And that's based on the concept that there's invisible energy in spaces. So I began to suddenly think, maybe I'm not crazy. And I started to explore how the energy of environments affects us, and that led me also to understanding that people have an energy field as well, and we can carry old memories, old hurts, old tension and stress in our energy fields that can block our progress in life, keep us stuck, and slowly out of that, over many years of training and research and study, I evolved a system of energy clearing, that you can clear people's energy, you can clear places' energy, and just bring it back to a more balanced state. Does that make sense?
Well, it does, and we've certainly had talks on our program about this, and I remember one of them had to do with, for instance, the Native American way of energy clearing, where apparently you burn, it's either fir or sage or cedar, I can't remember which one it is. You light this little bundle up, and the smoke goes throughout the house into the rooms that you want to clear, and and people, they may think about this as if we hear the term woo-woo, and I always think, well, that's fine for the people that I believe are out there kind of acting like they're doing this, they're playing around with it. Right. But I think with the real, down-to-earth, grounded people who really take a look at this, even from a scientific approach, energy is energy. It always goes somewhere. It never dies, and it's never really created when you think about it. And physics is certainly shed quite a bit of light on this. And and it's interesting because when you take a look at this, for instance, you have to realize, okay, in your life, have you had these experiences? For instance, a friend of mine many years ago used to, come home from work, and this was somebody who was in the food service industry, actually served customers. And this was someone who was actually very good, very successful at what they did, and really loved and had a passion for it. Of course, through economic times, a place that she was working kind of had a downturn, and so she was out there looking for work, and finally found an ideal place where you kind of go in, and at first look, this place is just really neat. It's got the high back chairs, kind of look like old school, old world, like a speakeasy. And she says, I went in there and I had all this enthusiasm, but the funny thing about it was I could just feel this sort of negative energy, and I couldn't figure out what this was. Now, this had been a place that was started out with a gentleman some 50 years ago, and eventually was taken over by a couple of his children as he passed. And what it was is these children who were running this place were basically running it into the ground with their energy. Great place, but she could just feel, she says, this real negative energy. And what was funny was, aside from, I think it was the chef and the people that ran the place, nobody had ever had a tenure there much past 2 years.
Wow. And
she says, is it me? Am I going nuts? Because I'm starting to feel this feeling that I've never felt before in this particular industry. And what is it? And I said, well, did it ever occur to you that over the years of struggling with this place, maybe trying to keep it, or whatever was happening, that maybe you're taking on or feeling the energy that has kind of seeped into the walls and it's beginning to have an effect on you? She says, no, I never. Isn't that kind of that weird spiritual stuff you're talking about? I said, no, think about this. When you're in environments or around those people that seem to exude that, where, there's they irritate the heck out of you when you're around them, or you just feel real positive, like, God, I love being around this person. Do you feel these things? Are they real? And she says, come to think about it, you're right.
Absolutely. And we've all had this experience where we walk into a room and it just doesn't feel right, and we want to leave, but we can't explain why, or we meet someone and we feel an immediate comfort and affinity with them before they've even said or done anything, but we meet another person and we just kind of want to back away and we can't explain it. And you're right. We do kind of broadcast a message of who we are. Spaces can hold things that happened there before. And you're right that science actually validates this to a great degree. You mentioned Native American techniques of space clearing, and actually in every culture all over the world there are ancient techniques of space clearing. That's not what I do because I feel we've evolved since then, and so we can, with the knowledge of science that we've gained, we can use that to kind of modernize, refine, update these ancient techniques in a way that fits our modern lives more. But, in science there's this concept called entrainment, and that means that systems synchronize to each other. That, in one study they found that if they put a whole bunch of grandfather clocks in a room together, the clocks that have the pendulums that swing back and forth, they put all those clocks in a room together and all the pendulums are swinging at different rates, but they come back a little bit later, all the pendulums are swinging in exactly the same rhythm and the same momentum because they've entrained to each other. And people do this as well. They've even found that in restaurants, people will chew to the rhythm of the background music in the restaurant. But if there's no music, what they've found is that people chew at the same rhythm to all the other people eating in the restaurant at that time. And, you can be sure nobody's looking around trying to match how they're chewing their food to what everyone else is doing. Mm-hmm. So we're unaware of this. But, imagine if you're working in an office where there's a lot of other stressed people there. Well, your system is having to cope with their stress during the day. You can be a little bit of a sponge and soak that in, and that may explain why you're so exhausted at the end of the day. It may not be you worked so hard. It may just be, oh my gosh, you were having to contend with all the stressed energy coming at you from the people around you.
Now, speaking of stress, let's kind of get on an up close and not necessarily a personal level between us, but you had an experience with someone who was a recently divorced man and a mattress. Tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, in my early days of working with feng shui, what I would do is I would go into someone's home, and along with what I knew about feng shui, I would just feel the energy. I would physically get information, get sensations, things like that. And so this was a man who had been recently divorced, moved into a beautiful new condo. I walked into the bedroom, beautiful bedroom, but as I got closer and closer to the bed, I started feeling my jaw tense up and my teeth were kind of clenched, and I started feeling frustrated for no reason at all. And it was obviously the energy held in the mattress. When we sleep, we off-gas. We process our day, and mattresses can soak that up and hold that information. So as I got closer to the mattress, I even started hearing kind of angry voices arguing in my head. And I asked him how old the mattress was. And he said, oh, gosh, maybe, 12 years old. It was the mattress my wife and I got when we first got married. So in the divorce, he'd gotten custody of the mattress. He'd moved it into the condo. And I asked him, did you guys ever argue in bed before you went to sleep? And he said, oh, yeah, all the time. I think that's why I started grinding my teeth at night, because I went to bed so frustrated. So I was just picking up on the feelings that were embedded into the bed, literally. And as I explained this to him, his first response was, oh, my gosh, I'm going to run out and buy a new mattress today, because he'd realized that he and his new girlfriend were starting to argue in bed as they went to sleep. Now, at the time, I hadn't yet learned energy clearing, and I started thinking, gosh, this is going to be getting really expensive for people if they have to keep throwing out furnishings and buying new ones all the time just because they're holding on to negative energy. But a few years later, I would have been able to simply, in a few moments, clear the negativity out of the mattress, and it would have been just fine to sleep on, and it wouldn't have affected him in the same way.
It's funny that I bring up this story because personally, my wife had the same experience. Now here's the funny thing. So we decided it was about two years back, I believe it was 3 years. Decided it's time for us to get a new bed, not just a new mattress, but we thought let's kind of go all out here. We're going to get away from the box spring and all that nonsense they sell now. And we're going to find a really nice mattress and a really cool bed frame that eliminates the need for a box spring. So we decided. As I was looking online, I came across what was known as the Chinese opium-style bed frame. Yeah, this thing was just beautiful, nothing like I'd seen out there, okay? So we finally found a place that happened to be somewhat local that was actually selling them, and we thought, oh, this is kind of cool. And this guy, he really deals a lot with Asia and India and Micronesia, I guess, if you will, when he goes out to get, and he specializes in teak wood furniture. Some of this stuff is just incredibly beautiful. So he happened to have this at a wonderful price, and what he said was, as he says, what I tend to use is what you would call, I'll just say, recyclable teak wood. So basically, you might go out and you might find a Chinese dojo or Japanese dojo or something like that. They're about to tear this down, and they actually use that wood and they repurpose it. That's what I was looking for. So he built this bed frame, or this bed frame was actually built from that wood. So we're into a month and 2 and 3 months, and all of a sudden she's starting to say, I'm having these really strange dreams that I never had before. And she's not one that talks about dreams too much, but she says, there's this going on, and so she says, maybe I'm picking it up from the bed. And I said, no, that's very possible. I remember living in a home years ago where it just drove me mad with the dreams of it being unfinished. I was just... Or when I was renting, are these landlords ever going to get in? And I would have these dreams that, they're going to work on it, but wake up. And, it was literally maddening until I moved from the place, and I haven't dreamed about it since. But you see that there's a real thing going on that maybe when you're awake and conscious, you may not pick it up, or you may, but how in the dream worlds, this energy is really transferring into there and communicating with you.
Yes.
Is that what usually happens with people?
Well, it can. That's definitely one way that can happen. But you don't even have to be asleep. I mean, often with people, they'll say to me, it's funny, I never liked to sit in that chair, or I never spent any time in that room. And then I find that the chair or the room is a place where someone spent some time and was stressed or upset, maybe had angry phone calls. Well, every time you have a little stressed feeling, it's like you make an imprint there in the chair or in the space. often if I'm space clearing someone's home, I'll find an area of stress stuck right inside the front door. And you might think, well, why the heck would that be there? Well, imagine if every morning as you're leaving for work, as you approach the front door, just as you're about to leave, you're anxious, you're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm late, or did I remember this, or oh, I'm dreading that meeting. Well, you make a little deposit of that stressed feeling right there. And then when you come home at night and put your things down right after you step in the door and heave a big sigh and go, oh, thank God that day is over, or I can't believe she said that to me. Well, again, another little deposit of release of stress there. You do that day after day after day, what accumulates is quite an area of stressed energy that every time you step into that spot, it's going to make it more likely you'll feel that way again. I had one woman who hated her job. She just hated her job, and every night she would come home and sit on the couch and ruminate about the day and how much she hated her job.
Oh, my.
and deeply imprinted into that couch her feelings of dissatisfaction. Well, finally, unfortunately, she got a new job, which was wonderful, much better fit for her. She really enjoyed the job. But every night she came home and went to sit on the couch, and surprising, not a surprise to us, that was when she started having some negative thoughts about the job. But it wasn't actually about the job. It was that the couch held that old negativity. She was sinking into that, soaking that in, and that changed how she felt in the moment. She still loved her job, but we needed to clear the couch, and then she was fine.
Now, as you began to do this energy clearing, you began to notice differences within yourself because you were actually feeling as you were taking on the energy, but I suppose it would also be a matter of, well, now that this has happened, how do I send it somewhere else?
Yeah.
And think about that. I keep thinking of this episode of the original Star Trek series. I think it was called The Empath, where Dr. McCoy was being put under a series of stress experiments by these aliens, and there was this woman who was in the room, and after they were done, she would kind of go over there and, begin to touch them and actually take on what had happened. And really the whole experiment was ultimately to see whether or not this particular species, with its ability of being able to take on, maybe it's a wound or whatever it was, and heal this, whether they could basically beat McCoy so bad that it would literally cause her death if she was to go all the way and see. And that was the question: was she willing to do this?
Yeah.
And not that this is the situation, but I'm sure sometimes it must feel like you're about to die.
Well, actually, that is how it felt before I learned clearing, and this is how many sensitive people or people who consider themselves to be empaths feel, because they don't have good energetic boundaries, that if someone around them is suffering, they have such big hearts, caring hearts, that they either consciously or unconsciously try to take some of that load from that person to ease their suffering. But that's not the right way to do it, because then you end up either exhausted or not feeling well or upset. And so this is actually what we're all doing to one degree or another, whether we're aware of it or not, all throughout our day. We're being little energy sponges and taking things on from other people. You don't have to be an empath to do this. It happens to us all the time through this process of entrainment that I referred to. It's only when I learned clearing that I was able to develop good boundaries and notice when I was being affected by somebody else's stress, to notice when a feeling didn't actually belong to me, it belonged to somebody else, so I didn't have to take it on. It's not about sending it somewhere, and it's certainly not about sending it back to that person, which some people who train people in energy do, and I find distressing to hear about, because, if someone is in pain or have negative thoughts or they're highly stressed and they're broadcasting that information out, it would be unkind to throw that right back at them and make them feel worse.
Right.
So with this is a different form of understanding about energy. And often when I do a clearing for someone, if I'm even just clearing them personally and not their space, sometimes they worry like, oh my gosh, I don't want you to take the bad energy off of me and put it onto somebody else. Where does this energy go when you clear it? And that's a very valid question. I often equate it to a situation where if you had a garden hose that had a kink in it and the water wasn't flowing out, well, if you unkink the hose, and the water now flows out, things are fine again, but where did the kink go? Well, there wasn't anything to go anywhere. There was a kink. It was stuck, and you released it. And basically what we're doing when we're clearing a person or a place is we're releasing the stress that's blocking the healthy flow of energy in their system. So there isn't anything that goes anywhere or can affect other people. It's just a letting go or a release, and then balance returns.
Mm-hmm.
My work is all based on the principles of Chinese medicine, which is thousands of years old. And if you go to an acupuncturist for a treatment, they're basically doing the same thing, only they're doing it to your physical body instead of your energy body. They're working to bring your energy back into balance so that the chi flow in your body is smooth and easy and goes everywhere that it needs to, and then health will be restored. There's an invisible energy flow also in your system that affects you emotionally as well as physically, and that's more of what my work is about. A lot of people call my work acupuncture for the spirit, because it's not about treating your health, your physical health, it's more about treating your emotional health.
Now, one more that I thought I'd bring up, too, is you talked about how you were waiting to go on to a radio station to be interviewed, and there was an author who was also scheduled to go on who would be coming on after, but you had discovered, oh my goodness, this person decided to reach out and say, hey, do you think you can hook me up here? What actually happened there?
Yeah. Well, this is a very early morning radio show where if you're a guest, of course, you have to arrive at like 4:30 in the morning.
Oh, I know, and I can remember, I'll tell you a funny story. Years ago when I was involved with modeling for a bridal show, we had to show up real early in the morning like that.
Yeah.
And there were the two local personalities. They were actually television personalities, and what we were about to be was filmed for the evening, the early evening show. And the male host, Craig Walker, he came in, he was just like sunshine. Must be a time in the morning this guy gets up all the time.
Yeah.
And the other one was, I believe Tracy was her name, and she came in and she just had that bee look. It's like, oh my goodness, she lights up on the camera, but boy, this isn't somebody you want to run into early in the morning. But so I know how the early in the morning. I'm not an early morning person myself.
Yeah, well, that's a bit too early for me to be bright and cheery on the radio, at least. Yeah, so I was sipping my coffee and clearing myself and trying to prepare my notes and try to be mentally sharp. And the other author showed up. She was going to go on after me. And she showed up all frazzled. She'd already had a hard day, apparently, and she was just a mess. And so she was asking me what I was going to be interviewed about, and I just told her a little bit about it. And she just perked right up and said, oh, my God, can you please do a clearing for me right now? And, my first thought was, well, good grief here. I'm trying to get ready for my interview. I'm looking at my notes. I'm trying to get myself together. But then I thought, well, that's silly, because what I know about clearing is that every time you do a clearing for someone else, you benefit also. It's a little clearing for you, too. So
really?
It can only help. Yeah.
So when you clear a room or somebody or whatever the case is, you actually gain the benefits. That seems like a real nice symbiosis in a way.
It's a beautiful thing. It's been called accelerated meditation, not because it's about get enlightenment quick, but it's that people have found that it takes you to a place of harmony and balance and peace within a much shorter amount of time than often the years of a meditation practice brings you to. So yeah, every time you do a clearing, it returns your system into balance as well. So I did a quick clearing for her. And, she said, oh, that's great. I do start to feel better. And we chatted a bit, but then it was time for me to go on. So we just exchanged business cards, and I went on and didn't see her after I left. And I got an email from her a few hours later, and she said to me, she wrote in all capital letters, in that 10 minutes of clearing, I lost an emotional 30 pounds. How do I learn this stuff?
Wow.
And it's, clearing is very gentle and it's very subtle, but it can have amazingly powerful and immediate results. I often hear this from people. I had one man who emailed me the day after I did a clearing for his wife over the phone. She and I were just talking together, and I was working with her over the phone. And he said, I was standing there watching my wife as you cleared her, and I watched her transform back into the woman I married.
Wow.
Which was an honor to me to hear. I understood what he meant about that. She'd been so stressed. She'd actually been sick that day, and immediately her cold disappeared as well. Now, results aren't always that instant, but, it's these beautiful moments that really can testify to the power of the work.
Now, we've certainly talked about a space that people might live in or work in, and in personal space as well. But here's another one too that we experience more and more of, and that is of technology. You see people literally, if you're out downtown, for instance, like I tend to be from a lot of times, it's almost as though the cellular phone has grown as part of a birthing process into a person's hand. They just never disappear. And over time, these things actually, I believe, do take a toll on the human body because they're very unnatural in that state. Let's talk about how the effects of technology might be on a person's energy.
Yeah, well, first let's establish that there's nothing bad about technology. It's made
No,
our
and
life
I'm certainly not
wonderful.
suggesting
And I
that.
know you're not saying that. But I don't want to, sometimes people try to promote a very fear-based thing where we shouldn't have it at all, and that's not true. But you're right, it does have an effect on us. And the thing is that everyone has a different sensitivity to it. Some people aren't so affected by it at all. Other people are severely affected by it, and there are some people who even need to move to live in a remote place where there's not so much electrosmog. So what we're talking about here is, the electromagnetic fields that come off of our computers and our appliances and our televisions, and the microwave radiation that comes off of the cell phones. And with clearing, you can clear any adverse effects of these things. It's a very simple process once you learn how to do it. But let me give you an example about how this can work, because it can sound kind of big and scary, but when we bring it down to the practical everyday things, we can understand it better. I was doing a space clearing once for a family that had just moved into a new house, and this is often a wonderful thing to do after you've moved in, to kind of clear any residual energy that the old occupants have left behind. So I was doing the space clearing for them, and part of their problem was that the husband in the family was the family cook. He loved to cook. Everybody loved his cooking. He'd come home from work every night and cook a wonderful dinner, and it was great until they moved into this new house. And after they moved in, he didn't even want to go in the kitchen. He didn't want to cook at the stove. It's just like he just felt an aversion to doing it. And he started picking up carry-out on the way home from work to feed people, and the whole family was unhappy. And so I thought, well, this is interesting. Let's do an experiment here. And I tested to see, for his system, how close he could get to this stove, which was an electric stove, how close he could get to it before his body was negatively affected by the electromagnetic field that it was radiating out. And for him, he couldn't even get in the kitchen before he was adversely affected. And this was why he was feeling such an aversion to even being in that space, that unconsciously his body was kind of going, don't make me go there. But after I cleared the effects of those fields on his system, he was able to walk right up to the stove and started cooking the family dinner, and all was well with the world after that. His wife, however, her system wasn't as sensitive to the electromagnetic fields coming from the stove. She didn't want to become the family cook. So fortunately we were able to clear it so that he was able to do that. But that's an example about how different people can have different reactions.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Now, let's talk about what energy clearing is. We've talked about why we do it, the possibilities of what exists, so that way you can kind of, freshen things up. And I know just recently I've been kind of watching some YouTube videos of Anthony Robbins, and you see this guy talks a lot about energy. Changing your energetic states, when you want to get to these new levels of being able to be whatever it is you want to be. But he talks quite a bit about this and how important that is. Now, you say that when it comes to energy clearing, from your experience, that it's not a matter of doing, but being.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about that.
Yeah, well, so there's a lot of systems out there that try to work to help you change, and all of them too are effective to one degree or another. Some work better with some types of people, some with others. But one kind of consistent quality that they all have is they come from a place of thinking that you have to find out what's wrong and then do something to fix it. And this belies a rather superficial understanding of energy, that human beings are far more complex systems than just a machine that would have to be fixed. And often if we try to do something to someone, well, it may eliminate that symptom, but you haven't really gotten to the root cause of the imbalance, and so it pops up somewhere else. So the person feels okay for a while, and then there's a new problem. It's just a new version of the same old thing. With clearing, what it's actually doing is making an energetic connection with a person or a place. And with a very calm, quiet, open-hearted attention, just discovering any place where stress is held in that system. It's almost like if you get a massage, massaging the knot out of the muscle in somebody's shoulder. It allows it to just release, because when you're in touch with a stress that someone else holds, well, you don't have any history with that. It's not your stress. If you're thinking about something stressful in your past, it probably causes you some discomfort to think about it, some pain. You're going over it again in your head, and so your system contracts around it. You either don't want to feel it or you get lost in those bad feelings, and neither one is helpful. But if someone else can tune in and connect with that stress, they didn't have that bad experience. They don't have the history with it, the memory of it. And so they can kind of love it more than it loves itself. They can kind of hold the space for it to relax, and then it just lets go, like the hose unkinking. And then there's balance, and the energy's flowing again. Then the person has more freedom to kind of move beyond their stuck places. Does that make any sense?
Absolutely, it does. Bringing a lot of common sense to this, too, is I think what a lot of people will feel very encouraged about, because this is something that anyone can learn to do.
Yeah, it's amazingly easy to learn. I teach retreats every year. There's 2 coming up this summer where people can have a direct experience of it and receive clearings, and we go even farther. But my new book, also Clear Home, Clear Heart, is a training. It's not just talking about clearing. It teaches you in a very easy step-by-step process how to clear yourself, how to clear the energy of another person, how to clear your home or your office, so you can get started right away. My purpose with my book is to empower people to put this into action in their own lives, and I'm just getting such beautiful response from people. Even after trying a clearing just one time, they're finding amazing results.
Now, we've certainly given clues as to whether or not we need, or there's the possibility that a clearing needs to happen. How can people listening today come to see or know those signs?
Ooh, good question. Well, I often just suggest that you just play with this concept in your everyday life. And one way to do that can be kind of fun is before you leave the house for the day, just stop for a moment and just kind of take a baseline reading of how you're feeling right now. How do you feel physically? How do you feel emotionally? You're getting a reading of you at home where you're still contained in your own energy, and just kind of get a sense of that, maybe do a little scan, and then go to wherever you're going, work or wherever, and after you've been there for a few minutes, just pause and take another reading about how you're feeling now. And any difference that you notice, and you will notice a difference, can either be that you're sensing other people's energy or that your system is reacting to other people's energy. If you suddenly, after you've gotten to work, find that you're breathing more shallowly, where at home you were breathing more in a more relaxed way, well, maybe you're just tense and stressed about work, but maybe you're also being affected by all the other stressed people around you. Energy doesn't stop at walls. So if you're in a cubicle or an office and on the other side of the partition or the wall there's someone who is up all night with a baby or just had a fight with their wife or stressed about the deadline, well, that energy can be coming through the wall to affect how you feel in the space. And although that may sound simple, just the awareness that, wait a minute, this feeling may not be mine, this feeling may not have anything to do with me, can help you let it keep on moving on. I remember after a workshop one time, I got an email from a woman who had had frequent migraines all her adult life. And during the clearing workshop, she learned clearing, and she didn't have a headache the entire workshop. After about 2 weeks later, she sent me an email saying she hadn't had a headache for the past 2 weeks, but then suddenly this morning, her head started to hurt again. And she realized, she said, but then I realized it wasn't mine. So then it went off looking for someone else.
I remember Dr. Wayne Dyer talking about that. He says, I just don't get sick. I choose not to.
Yeah.
And then somebody apparently had come across his path at one of the seminars he was doing, apparently up in the north central part of the United States, and something about a cold or something like that. And he says, no, but I know a little old lady up there, in this area here that's interested.
Yeah.
Now, how does that happen? Let's give it a good example, like going to work. This is just the environment sometimes, and it can seem overwhelming. What can a person do listening today to begin to clear themselves if they step into that situation, but they just don't want to experience that anymore? And I know that it's true that when you change yourself, whatever those little changes are, people will begin to notice, and a lot of times they'll actually automatically change being around you. And that's kind of an encouraging thing. It's not that you're manipulating anything. It's just, think about that, how that person comes along who may have wronged you, and all of a sudden they show up, and you feel that tenseness, like, oh my God, I'm bracing for a fight here. But how you can shift and change that, especially in an environment that a lot of times people you hear, they just don't look forward to going to work. They feel stressed even. You got the Monday morning blues, and thank God it's Friday, so something's going on there.
Yeah. Well, again, you're very right that as we change inside, which is what clearing does for us, it kind of retrains the system to respond to our life in a new way. As we change inside, we start broadcasting a different message that people unconsciously read and react to. And so as we're broadcasting a new message, people are reacting to us differently. I often work with women who are looking for a relationship, but it seems like every person they date is just a new version of the same old thing. They keep dating the same guy with a new face every time, and they can't understand why, but they're just a reflection of where they are in terms of kind of replaying that old scenario. And as they learn clearing or get cleared, that information changes, and they find a relationship, someone who's a better fit for them. It's almost like we have this thick layer, all these filters that we view the world through, and with clearing, a lot of those clear away. So it's also important, you're talking about what can we do right now, to look at your reactions, to recognize that, as you see the boss coming down the hall towards you, that instead just tune into how your body's feeling and where your emotions are going, and how that is actually going to affect your boss when he or she walks in your door and starts talking to you. If you can, even just that awareness can help ease it and bring you back to a more calm and less stressed place. And then you look up with a smile on your face, and the boss goes, oh, what was I wanting to talk to them about? and things go much better. It's the subtle little things, the subtle little changes, the gradual changes that actually can create huge transformations, actually over a very short period of time.
That's very encouraging to know something like that. What are some other things that you could recommend to our listeners, just little steps they can take now to be able to achieve this?
Yeah, well, there's another easy kind of short process that I often recommend to people, especially people who are noticing that when they're out in public, they're going into overwhelm. A lot of people who are very sensitive to energy hate going to shopping malls, especially at holiday season, because all the tons of people around them and all the stress. They can only be there for a short period of time, and then they just have to get out. Or they don't like crowded, noisy parties, or again, even at work or even at home, if there are people who are stressed or upset at home, that this affects you. I'll give you the technique in just a second, but let me give you a quick example that I talk about in my book that may help people relate. I talk about in the book about a young guy, a teenage guy named Alex, who was just a lovely guy at such an early age, kind of mature beyond his years, and he became interested in meditation and yoga, and so he resolved that every morning when he woke up, he was going to get up an hour early and meditate and do yoga to start his day. And oh my gosh, after he started doing that, he felt wonderful. And then he would leave his room and head to the kitchen to eat breakfast. He had to go down this long hallway and all the way through the whole house to get to the kitchen on the other side of the house. But by the time he arrived at the kitchen, all those good feelings he had just disappeared. He just started feeling awful, and his mood plummeted, and he couldn't understand what was wrong with him, that he wasn't able to maintain that wonderful state of being, even for just a few minutes that it took to walk through the house. But the fact was that as soon as he left his room, he was entering the energy of the house, immersed in everybody else's energy, and his teenage sister's disturbed emotions, and his older brother's depression, and his mother's anxiety, and his father's frustration. That was like a big soup that he was swimming through, filling the space, and that's why he was being so affected and his mood went down. He is not unique. This happens to all of us to one degree or another, depending on who we live with and who we work with. So you don't even have to leave the house to be feeling like you're kind of going into overwhelm or being affected. So here's an easy process that people can do anytime, and nobody will know you're doing it. The first step is that you just become aware of your breathing. That when people start to feel a little overwhelmed or stressed, one of the first things that happens is that their breathing becomes too shallow, and they're not taking nice enough deep breaths. So become aware of what's going on with your breathing, and then give yourself the gift of a couple of nice deep breaths. Then the next step is to become aware of the effects of gravity on your body. Now that may sound a little strange, but what I mean by that is, feel the weight of your feet on the floor. If you're sitting, feel the weight of your bottom in the chair. Feel the weight of gravity on your shoulders. This also kind of helps ground you and bring you back into yourself and less affected by the energy around you. But there's a really important next step here, and the last part of this exercise may take a little imagination for some people. I want you to imagine that you have an energy field around you. It extends out beyond your body. We all have this. And as you imagine this, I want you to see if you can visualize what it looks like right now, like what shape it is, how big it is, because what we tend to do as we go through our days is if we're worried about our child, for instance, there's a little stream of energy going off in their direction. Or if we're thinking about someone and having negative thoughts about them as well, we're losing some energy toward them. We tend to shoot our energy way out in front of us because we've all been conditioned in our culture to believe that we won't be happy until we get there, that goal, way out there. Until we achieve that goal, we will never be happy. And so we're always shooting our energy out in front of us. And that tends to keep the energy behind us very narrow and shallow, and that's not good. That ideally, our energy body, our energy field, should almost be like an egg shape or a circle around us, just maybe about 12 to 15 inches out from the body. So after
I'm sorry, Gene, to interrupt you, but it's funny you say that about the egg shape because I've seen that somewhat consistently in other ways. That's pretty wild, the egg shape. Yeah, and it's not, around your body, but it's separate from it. That's pretty wild to hear that.
That's great. Well, yeah. Well, if something is true, it should not be some amazing new thing that you've never thought of or heard of before.
Right.
It should be confirmed by other sources, so that's good. Well, we tend to be lopsided in our energy field, and we tend to have it too big, and that can make us go into overwhelm. It can make us feel depleted and exhausted at the end of the day. So the final step of this exercise is just to imagine that you are reaching out with your arms and scooping your energy back closer to your body, to gather it back, maybe 12 to 15 inches out, or maybe even a little bit closer if that feels right to you. You may have to push it out more behind you if it's been too shallow behind you, and bring it to the same distance on each side and above your head and below your feet, until you get a sense of this egg shape around you. And that creates a nice, condensed, concentrated, saturated source of chi, of energy for you to draw from, very nourishing for you. And it also creates a boundary where you leave off and the rest of the world begins. And then you're less affected by others' energy.
Another one, too, and you hear this quite a bit for rejuvenation, is getting out and doing nature walks, reconnecting that way. And one suggestion I'd made to a woman I knew years ago is, I want you right now, from what you're feeling, you see that tree out there in the yard? Just go out and wrap your arms around it, put your cheek against it, and just hold it.
Well, there's a practice in Japan called taking a tree shower.
Really?
Very much
Here,
like
I thought
that,
I knew a fair amount about the Japanese culture and philosophy. It's really a tree shower. Let's talk about that one.
It's considered very healing that you go for a walk under the canopy of the trees, and the beautiful shower of chi, of life force, of energy raining down on you from the leaves, from the branches, and even in the winter when there's no leaves, there's still chi coming from above. That is incredibly replenishing for you. So you're right on that nature, and in fact in Chinese medicine, one of the basic principles is that nature heals. So whether it's going for a walk in the forest or a walk along the beach or digging in the garden, those things are also forms of clearing your energy and releasing any stuck places that help you come back more into balance.
Wow, it was fun watching her, too, because she began being playful, and I was kind of off in a distance, so I wasn't kind of interfering and being the observer, but she'd step back and look up and down, and the smile just kept getting bigger on her face, and then she'd hug it again, and after a while, I think this went on for a good 20 minutes, and she came back and she says, wow, you were right, I can't believe how good I really feel, and quite frankly, if you really want to know the truth, Gene, I was sort of kind of guessing at that one, but I thought, why not?
Well, and here's the thing. What often seems like a guess is probably an intuitive hit, that intuitively, with your gut instinct, you knew that would be the right thing to tell her, and good for you for following that instinct.
Oh, okay. Well, great for me. Here's a big one. Now, we can sometimes be in an environment, and it could be for a period of time, where, and I know all of us experience this, where all of a sudden you feel stuck. Your creativity just doesn't seem to be there, no matter how much harder you put effort into something. It could be your business, relationships, whatever it is, it just doesn't seem to get any better. In fact, it seems to slowly be deteriorating and getting worse. Okay. Now, obviously, from what we've talked about here today, there's a good, strong possibility this can be shifted right where you're at. But what if sometimes people just say, I've been in this environment too long, I think just a nice big change, whether it's moving the house, the location, to another state, another country. We know that when we change jobs, that first year, well, at least the first 6 months anyway, feels exciting because you're learning new things, you're working with fresh new people. But there might be that inevitability that if you make this big leap, which is very energizing, I think, for a lot of us to get out of that block-stuck feeling, but that it starts to come back again. What do we do to cause some prevention here, I suppose? Or how do we, not doing, do we do this?
Yeah, I know. The English language needs to catch up with these new concepts.
It sure does, doesn't it? Especially a tree shower.
Yeah. It reminds me of that old saying, wherever you go, there you are.
Right.
You take yourself with you. But you're right. Even in terms of environmental psychology, they've found that any change in your environment can get you unstuck, can trigger a change. There's been lots of research about that. But it only lasts for a certain amount of time. So it can be very helpful to move house, go to a new city or a new place or remodel or things like that. Absolutely. And it creates a window of opportunity for you to continue to change. Unfortunately, with most people, that's not enough, that you take your stuff with you, and unless you also do the inner work associated with the external change to kind of match that, then you just sink back into a new version of stuckness in a new house, in a new city.
Yeah, eventually you'll find yourself there. Even Tony Robbins says that. Yeah, the first however many months in a new job or whatever the case is, new relationship, it could be a new job, whatever. He says, but eventually you'll find yourself, unless you make those shifts, opening up those bags and experiencing the same things.
Well, it's kind of like my other 3 books that I've written about Chinese face reading, that people get a facelift thinking that that's going to solve all their problems. But the reason that they developed the wrinkles that they did was because of the emotional patterns they kept repeating over and over again. So they get the facelift, but they still have the same emotions they're repeating over and over again. And that's why most facelifts don't last. They often fail within 12 to 18 months because the person is still making those negative expressions that cause the wrinkles they wanted to get rid of. So yes, the work is actually, and this is why clearing I've just found so remarkable over the years, because it's not about having to relive the trauma or work it through. It's about letting it go, and that can be a very gentle, simple process of just releasing the energy, releasing the stuck places, not having to dig through things and somehow work it all out all over again. That rarely, frankly, I don't think that works at all. It just kind of can increase the disharmony in the system. That this is a very lovely experience. And also, when you learn clearing, you learn how to do clearings for other people as well. I have people emailing me that, their dog now won't go to sleep at night until they've cleared them. They and run around in circles until their person gives them a nice clearing. Or their children, instead of throwing tantrums, will run up and say, "Mommy, can you clear me? Because I feel like I'm getting upset." So this is a tool that you can use in many ways in life, not just in terms of clearing yourself, but of just such a wonderful service for the people in your life.
So, in what we've covered today, for our listeners, let's go ahead, if you could, and tap on 3 things a person can do today that they can begin to help clear. Let's just work on ourselves to get started. It doesn't do you any good to go out there thinking you're going to fix someone else if you're certainly not in that position yourself. But, it's also about getting breakthroughs in your life, as we were just talking about here, how to get out of that unstuck mode and see things clearly. You can't solve problems, for instance, with the same thinking that got you the problems in the first place. So you can see the real true benefits of why we would want to be doing this. So if you could for us, Jean, leave our listeners with a couple of things they can do starting right now. And then eventually, of course, they're going to realize, wow, if this happens, maybe I need to go out and get the book and learn the rest of this stuff, which we'll give that information here before the show ends. But
sure.
Tell us a couple of things that listeners can do starting right now that they can begin to at least feel benefits of why this is important to do.
Yeah, there's something I talk about in the book which I find really useful just in everyday practical life, is that every time you have a thought or a feeling, there's 3 choices that you can make about that. The first 2 are the ones that we usually do. The first one is that we resist that feeling. Oh, God, I don't want to remember that event. I don't want to feel that again. We suppress it. We push it down. We don't want to feel it. But that just intensifies the tension in the system. It intensifies the disturbance in the system. Doesn't help at all. The second choice that we often make is to dive right into that feeling, to just get lost in it, to get swept out to sea, and then it can take us minutes or hours or even days to come back to shore and get back into balance again. And that's how most of us live our lives, either suppressing it or getting lost in whatever feeling we're having. But the third choice is to allow the feeling, to understand it's just a feeling. And one wonderful thing that science has found is that any feeling that you have really only lasts for 90 seconds.
Really? Wow.
Yes,
I know some people would say, God, this has been bugging me for months.
Well,
no, you've chosen to let it bother you for months. But even back again to Tony Robbins, he says, but you'll find that breakthroughs and change actually happen in moments.
Yeah.
Just like you're saying. But go ahead.
It takes 90 seconds for the system to process an emotion, that all the biochemicals and everything coursing through your bloodstream and your energy as a result of an emotion you're having, it's completely done in 90 seconds. But why then do people keep having that feeling continue is they start it up again and again and again. They keep going back to it instead of just allowing it to move on. This is just a feeling. This is just some information about something going through my system right now. And I could literally look at my watch as soon as it starts and go 89, 88, 87, 86 and count down to 90 seconds and know that we're done and we can move on. It's far easier than people realize, but we've been conditioned in our culture to keep running the program, to keep running the feelings, to identify with our feelings, to believe in them as our truth, and this is what keeps us stuck.
And then create a story around the whole thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So almost the mantra is, this is just a feeling. It's just some information. And that can transform everything for you.
So there it is, folks. That's the step you can take there when you begin to have that feeling at first. Know that it's going to take, at best, just over a minute. Feel it and let it go.
There you go.
Now, what's another step a person can take?
Well, I often give people a visualization to go with that. If you imagine that when you become aware of a feeling rising in your system, to pretend that it's like a helium balloon that's labeled with that feeling. If you're starting to feel anxious, then just picture a little balloon coming up with the word anxiety on it. And that kind of depersonalizes it. It's not that you're anxious. It's that, there's some anxiety rising in my system. And what happens for all of us is the minute the balloon comes up, we grab onto its string, and off we go. We're carried up into the sky, and then, again, we have to come back to Earth later on. But with this practice, when you can just look at the balloon, what soon happens is you don't grab onto the string, and the balloon keeps going up. And there'll be another balloon in a minute, and maybe this time you'll grab onto that string. But the more you practice that, the more that you'll just be noticing these balloons rising for 90 seconds, and you're still here and at balance and at peace, and you're not lost in the feeling. So that's another little easy visualization people can do.
And speaking of that particular visualization, I remember years ago that I actually had a hypnotist therapist, went into a hypnotist session, and that was exactly one of the things he was having me do while I was under, I guess, the trance, if you will. And that is, now I want you to write this word down on this balloon and then let it go.
How nice.
And another one that he did, too, and it was funny because I started practicing this and I thought, wow, I can't believe it's that easy because of what I was there for. Another thing, too, is pretend that you're, on the beach right to where the water comes up over the sand. And we all know, you could step in the wet sand there, and minutes later the ocean will just wash away that footprint like it was never there. So he would encourage me, I want you to write this word here.
Oh, nice.
And now see the ocean waves, that sort of a thing. And it's the same thing like when I meditate. One of the things that I learned years ago, at least through meditation, was see the rising swell of an ocean, just like your breath, and then watch it go away. And that's very soothing when you do that kind of meditation. Fascinating stuff here, Jean.
Well, we're all far more powerful than we think we are. We have never been taught to manage our thoughts and feelings, but we have total power over them. It's just that we give them power over us instead.
So quit being powerless, folks. Jean, it's certainly been a pleasure to have you here on the Beyond 50 radio program. Why don't, for our listeners, we'll give them that third step we talked about, which is, where is your website and how can they get the book?
So my website is my name, JeanHaner.com, JeanHaner.com. And there you can download the first 2 chapters of my book for free. You can find out about clearing retreats this summer, and there's lots of free information elsewhere as well.
At JeanHaner.com. Jean, thank you so much for being on the program today. My energy feels better already.
Thank you, Daniel. Thanks so much.
You bet. We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. Now that you've cleared some of that energy out of the way and you see your sights gaining some sharp, pointed views, you might be able to go over to Beyond50Radio.com. That is the number 50. We encourage you to sign up for a weekly e-newsletter so you can stay up to date on what's going on in the world of Beyond 50 and enjoy noticing what our upcoming programs are. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for joining us. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.